Hey guys, Dave and Len here. Welcome to Wargame Chat. Today we're going to talk about the different complexity levels of game, what each level is good for and what it's not good for. So let's start with low complexity. One of the good things about it is a low complexity game is easy to learn. Oftentimes they play fast, but not always. You do get some low complexity games that take 3 hours to play. But they're usually fun, and you can get new wargamers into the hobby with a low complexity game. The bad things I see about a low complexity game is there's not much depth to it usually. Sometimes there is, but usually not. And not as much strategy as you would get like in a medium or a high complexity game. So those are the drawbacks to it. What are your views on low complexity games?
Well, the object of low complexity games is it's supposed to be easy to learn. You have 3-4 pages of rules. You don't have to do that much, and you could hopefully sit up and play it. And of course, the problem with low complexity games at times is that after you play it 5 or 6 times, you kind of get the system, and you know that it's one-sided, or you have very little chance.
Yeah. Or you figured out the way to win, and it's like you keep repeating that way, and then each game turns into the same.
Oh, well, one thing, sometimes complexity. We played the Avalon Hill Gettysburg. When I played it many, many years ago when I was young, that was a very complex game.
Wow, because to me that's like the simplest of the Avalon Hill games.
And the thing was, when we played that, I'm going, wow. This was, I'm looking at this was like so complex when I played it, and now it's like, well, this is easier than 90% of the games I've played.
That is actually one, Gettysburg is one low complexity game where there's actually sufficient depth to it and sufficient strategy. I mean, it's essentially a a square and chit game, I guess you would call it, that plays like a miniatures game, so that's why I like it so much.
Well, also, you got, in the game, the Union wins like 90% of the time.
Well, I play the Union 90% of the time, so that's good.
So people were never complaining, well, gee, you have no chances to compete. Well, actually, the thing is that in the first day of battle, the Confederacy actually has a chance. And if the Union Army makes a mistake or too many mistakes, they could actually possibly lose the game. So, okay.
As far as medium complexity, good parts are they're not too bad to learn. I mean, it's got a lot more pages than a low complexity game. Sometimes they play fast, sometimes they play slow. The complexity level doesn't really determine that. But there's more strategy because the rules are more detailed, and generally, oftentimes the unit capabilities are more detailed too. So there's quite a bit more strategy in a medium complexity game than a low complexity game. And usually, once you invest the time to learn it, you're probably going to get more plays out of the game before you get bored with it than the low complexity game.
Well, actually, with medium complexity, you are introduced to things that you probably didn't, like supply lines. And then it gets very important where you put your supply depots or keeping the supply lines open. That sometimes decides your strategy more than anything else. And that will either be the biggest pain in the rump or the gem, the best part of the game, the most realistic part of the game. Because often good generals worry about their logistics more than where they're going to attack. Unless you're Rommel, he was told to screw up on that. I mean, we're running out of gas.
Well, look what he did, though. I mean, he was the most effective commander in the desert during that war.
Well, I think part of the reason why he was so effective, the British looked at this as, they won't advance this far. They'll be outrunning their supply lines. And oh crap, he's not afraid to outrun the supply lines.
Well, the fact that he used to always be at the front lines himself, oftentimes flying around the Fiesler Stork where he could actually see the enemy positions with his own eyes certainly helped with the strategy and stuff. And it also, the troops had a very high opinion of him because they'd see him a lot.
Well, I was thinking a lot of times he's at the front lines that That's all the British got there. Attack, attack. I don't care if we're outrunning the supply lines. What's wrong with gaining a few more miles?
Well, he kept
stubborn.
He kept the British off balance by constantly attacking and stuff too, because with the amount of forces the British had there, if they got in a coordinated attack, the Germans were going to suffer terribly. So
yeah, because when they started developing tactically in like 42, being better tactically, then the Germans were having problems.
Yeah.
And I always remember one time the British codebreakers decoded an order to Rommel saying that not to attack, and he telegraphed back that he was not going to attack. And said, well, he's not going to attack. He obeys orders. And he went ahead and attacked. That's how we got Quebec. Is the only guys that not Quebec, Tobruk. And don't worry, he's not going to attack. And I was like, what the hell is he doing here? Rommel disobeying orders. That's unheard of.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because sometimes, one thing I always found, tactical air combat always gets to be a problem. Because to do it right, you have to think in terms of climbing and diving, the second dimension. And that, executing and also putting it, planning your strategy on that, adds a little more adds to the game. But on the other hand, that's why we want to play these games. We want to be able to outclimb them and then dive on them. So.
Yeah. Now for the evil high complexity games. I personally, a lot of people can get mad at me for saying this, but high complexity and extremely high complexity war games have nearly destroyed the hobby. In the 1970s and early 1980s, games were a lot simpler. You had low and medium complexity games, and you had a lot more gamers. When they started switching to higher and higher complexity stuff, you started getting gamers who couldn't understand the rules, and they just paid a big bucks for a game, couldn't figure out how to play it. Either that, or they actually did figure out the rules, and the game was so unwieldy it was no fun to play. So I have a low opinion of high complexity games. There have been a few that have been good, but in my opinion, overall, they're bad for the hobby. They do give a lot of strategy if you actually understand the rules and the intricacies of the rules, and there's a lot of depth to them, but overall I don't like those. That's just me though. You guys may like them, but I don't. What do you think of low complexity games?
When you high complexity.
Yeah, like high. Yeah, was I saying low complexity?
You just said that about a minute ago.
Oh, okay. I meant high complex. High complexity games are ruining the hobby. Go ahead with high complexity.
Yeah, I think nowadays, in the 70s, before we had distractions like video games, computer games, it was like we liked high complexity games. It was a bigger challenge.
I found that games from the 70s to be lower complexity than now, actually.
Really? Well, I was thinking of a few of them, like Campaign for North Africa.
Oh, well, that was just ridiculous. I mean, that game's unplayable.
And I was thinking with some of them, it was like, it wasn't so much that they were complex as that they were large. Because I remember we looked at the Terrible Swift Sword, had 3 maps, 3-map battle of Gettysburg, and we're looking at all the counters and everything, and we had a joke that when we retire we'll probably break this game out. And but I also found out there are people playing like what they call the mega games. When you got older.
Yeah, I don't consider a monster game necessarily high complexity. You can have a monster game with 5 maps that's actually medium complexity or even low complexity.
Yeah, because that's one thing Dunnigan said that when they did their multi-map take on the Eastern Front of World War II, he told the guys, make the combat as simple as possible. Because what it is that if you're rolling for like 100 battles a turn, the odds will even out. So, you don't need any special rules, any special...
Well, also a game that of that scale that he's talking about, yeah, you'd need the combat low complexity. Otherwise, it's going to take forever to do combat.
Yeah.
And then you're going to make all these mistakes and stuff, and the other guy's going to be like, "Oh, you can't do that with this type of unit," and it just slows the game down.
So sometimes I always say complexity is number of actions times number of units. I never figured out what like a baseline, 12 units times 4 actions, 48. Is that complex or simple?
Well, I consider high complexity games. They have a large rule book, really large, and then also tons of exception rules, which are real easy to forget and just drive you crazy. You do a turn, you forget the exception rules, and now you got to redo the turn or something. And also, the worst thing about high complexity games is wargaming has this problem in general. Especially recently, not so much in the 1970s or early 1980s. In the 1970s and early 1980s, you had some games that had no errors in the rule book, none whatsoever. Now, it's like most of the games, even some of the low complexity ones, have a lot of errors in the rule book. And I found the more complex the game is, the more errors you're going to find in the rule book. And the errors are really a headache because you're reading the rules, you're trying to learn the rules, and there's 2 places in the rules that say a different thing about the same action. You don't know what to do, so you're wasting time going on Board Game Geek and seeing how everyone else is playing it and stuff. So that's the worst thing about high complexity games is they don't get play tested enough.
Oh yeah, because that's the problem is us with the big games. Someone noted the Siege of Jerusalem game by Avalon Hill.
Yeah, you sold me that one. I got that one at my house. Yeah,
that's a bear. That's a bear to play because you have to go through several battles and you have lots of units to start with, and then they slowly grind. He noted that it took years before the general actually had an article about the Siege of Jerusalem. You know, they would have good articles in that about the strategy for both sides because he figured what it is. It took a little while to find a couple people who were willing to play it all the way through. Because I remember, I think I played that. It took actually several weeks to finish it.
Oh, to finish the campaign?
Yeah,
I believe it.
Yeah, because you have to set up units, then you have to. You have to overall strategy. Then you decide which area you're going to attack, which units are going to lead, and of course both sides are going through this. And then you attack, which you have like about. I remember it seemed like every assault there was at least 100 casualties for the Judean players. So. And depending on how much of the city, and a lot of after the first assault, 90% of those casualties came back.
Yeah.
So it's like you're playing the whole. It's like the army reincarnates itself.
So
like
the
zombie army.
Romans end up winning that campaign or losing?
Actually, they lost by points.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Well. At a certain point, the Judean player can just, or like what happened historically, at a certain point they just abandon the city. And even though I had units out, they were able to, part of the garrison was able to evade between 2 legions. So they got enough guys out to, when you stacked up the points, that they had a tactical victory. Remember, the Judean leader actually survived. And historically.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Didn't they go to Masada or something afterwards?
Yes,
or at least some of them, yeah.
Yeah, Masada was the next stop.
Gotcha.
So, we're getting back to complexity. I think also one thing is that when you play a game, you want to see what things are important. Because I remember there's also... They use an example, the Battle of Chickamauga in the American Civil War. This is the battle which had terrible command control by both sides. And it says that like gamers had won a game on it where basically you have to decide like what orders you're going to give to the brigadiers and how you're going to deliver it. If you do it personally, the orders get carried out, but the rest of your army stands there and does nothing. You have to depend on initiative. You could either send an aide, that's faster but may be confused, or a written one, but that takes a little more time. Another person did the Battle of Chickamauga, and they just used command points. Each side had so many command points per turn to, use a command point to activate the brigade. Now, the result is that you can't move everything at once, but you have some idea of, you can move something. And he says the strange thing is the effect is the same, but the thing with the gamers version was that, okay, you just like, well, we sent a written order and the courier never made it. So they stood there.
Yep.
It's more colorful. I mean, that's the thing with complex games. It's more colorful. You decide, instead of just losing, it's like you could see a pattern. We didn't have enough command points. We're out of supply. Our morale broke for some reason.
Yeah, supply rules, though, you mentioned those as more medium complexity and stuff. I'm not getting back to medium complexity, but I found there are some low complexity games that actually have supply rules. And I mean, you can get, in a low complexity game, you can actually get pretty abstract with the supply rules. You can just say if a unit is all its zones, has 3 units around it, and every zone has zones of control completely around it, it's out of supply or something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, you can make it that simple.
Well, with some of them, it's like if you are surrounded by zones of control, you are out of supply and you may die in a couple turns. But if you want to attack, you have to be within certain movement points of a supply depot. Because sometimes when you attack, you have to have extra ammunition. But when you're on the defensive, you're not shooting up that much, so you don't need a depot. But you just have to have an open supply line.
So what's your favorite low complexity game? Siege of Jerusalem, or not low complexity? I mean high complexity. I keep saying that.
I think right now high complexity would have been Siege of Jerusalem. And I'm trying to think of any others that I played. That's the one I can think of right now.
Yeah, the only high complexity game that I like quite a bit, but I don't play it, and I'll explain why in a second, is Avalon Hill Advanced Squad Leader. It's actually a fun game to play, but it's so complex. If I'm going to put invest that amount of time in learning the rules and keep a track of everything, I'd rather just play a miniatures game.
Oh, one thing about Squad Leader came out at the same time Air War by SBI came out. And we tried both of them. And the guys I played with were really into airplanes. So we loved playing Air War, and some guys looked at it and says, well, how could you understand all this? Because in Air War, if you want to change your direction, you had to go through 4 steps. And but the thing is, you're only commanding 2 airplanes. In Squad Leader, you get at least a dozen guys, and then as the scenarios go, you get more and more people, and more and more complexity. I mean, with Squad Leader, you had to worry about whether or not the light machine gun breaks down, or the tank throws a tread, and things like that. It rarely happens, but when it does, it's bad for your side.
All right, you got anything else?
Okay. I'm trying to think of the best low complexity one.
Well, micro games, quite a few of those. I like. Here's a good one that's low complexity. Ogre. That's easy to learn, plays fast, and is fun.
And I think I always liked the Melee game.
Melee from Steve Jackson. Yeah, I got that, and the Magic one too. What's the? I can't remember what the other one's called. I got that too.
I haven't played Magic.
Yeah, we played it over here once.
Yeah, because one thing is I didn't like it being an arena, so I started playing it on other tactical maps.
Yeah. Well, there's people who sell maps for that game. I don't think they're Steve Jackson approved. I think it's just stuff other people have came up with. But I've seen some neoprene ones at conventions and stuff. They're kind of cool.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. There was a few multi-map. I'm trying to remember which Napoleonic games. There were a few multi-map ones. And I'm not sure if I'll ever... Well, actually, I think with Siege of Jerusalem, it was such a bear to play that I will never play that solo again. And I don't know if I want to... You have to have 2 or 3 people per side. So... All right.
All right, guys, that's all we got. Have a good evening.